Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about gut microbiome resilience and 5 ways to build it. But first, let's just touch on what microbiome resilience is and why is it important. Now, a microbiome resilience is really referring to the capacity of the microbiome to maintain a healthy ecosystem in face of a stressor. So an example here would be a course of antibiotics that you have to go on. You go on the antibiotics, and as many of us now know, there is going to be a negative impact on that gut microbiome. You may well see a drop in microbiome diversity and hopefully a transient dysbiotic state that arises. We see an increase in some of those potentially pathogenic organisms, and we can see a real reduction in some of the commensal and keystone species, these bacteria that have a really prominent role to play within both gut and systemic health. So the key concept within a resilient microbiome and its ability to kind of mitigate some of the stress from the antibiotics is this concept redundancy. And redundancy is really referring to this concept that if you've got lots of different bacteria residing in your gut, if you were to lose a bacteria from the ecosystem, i.e. it's totally wiped out after that course of antibiotics, there are going to be other bacteria that can pick up the slack. They're going to be able to fulfill the job that the bacteria did that you have now lost. Whereas if you have already low resiliency, you might not only lose more bacteria for good, i.e. they're not going to be able to replicate and grow back, but you also don't have a substitute system. You don't have bacteria that can step in and fulfill the job that the bacteria that have now been eradicated were doing. So diversity is fundamental to a resilient microbiome, and this concept redundancy kind of explains why. So this is also important because if you go out for dinner with a group of friends and some of you fall to a bout of food poisoning, those that don't are those that had a more resilient gut microbiome, a more diverse gut microbiome. And that's discussed in the literature. Now, what can we do about it? I'm going to talk about 5 ways to build a resilient, diverse gut microbiome. The first one, most of us know these days, and that is to try and have a really diverse diet. Research shows us that the more diversity we have in our diets, the more diverse our gut microbiome. So that means eating a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, but also potentially legumes, lentils, pulses, beans, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. We've got 10 categories of food, so to speak, that we could be considering here. Now, I appreciate that some of these can be really problematic for those of us with digestive issues, and that is kind of a bit of a separate conversation for today. But one thing I will touch on is I speak to quite a lot of people who have put themselves onto the carnivore diet because they've heard such wonderful things. And obviously there are, for some people, life-changing benefits from going on the carnivore diet. Some people see significant improvement, total alleviation of their gut symptoms, but also in other areas from obesity to cognitive symptoms like brain fog. A lot of things can clear up on the carnivore diet. And that is partly because it is the most extreme elimination diet that we have. You're taking out all of the fiber and pretty much all of the most problematic foods when we have gut issues. The problem is we back ourselves back into the corner, and there's only one way forward from there, which is to start re-diversifying, so to speak. And that can be a scary process for people that have had such profound improvement in their symptoms by going on a carnivore diet. But the carnivore diet is not for life. And I know some people might criticize me on this concept, but it really isn't. The research is very clear. We should be consuming plants as a way to support our health. So sometimes that one step back to take 2 steps forward is the right approach, i.e. going towards or to the carnivore diet can be quite life-saving for some. But the intention has to be to start bringing those foods back in, and that process might be a long, slow process, and that might require working with a one-to-one practitioner who understands this, who has experience in this area, who is going to bring compassion to that conversation. But there has to be the intention now of diversifying the diet, because there's nowhere else to go. And sometimes people are still symptomatic when they're on the carnivore diet, or they get better and then other symptoms or similar symptoms start to bubble up again. It's like, well, where do I go from here? And the way forwards is via bringing plant foods back in slowly and steadily, starting with some of the sort of safer foods, but then that has to be the direction that we move in, while also investigating what is going on. Why did you have to go to such extremes to try and get improvement in your symptoms? So the first one in regards to building resilient microbiome is to diversify the diet to the best of your ability within the context of your current symptoms and health status. The second thing to consider is going to be exercise. Exercise is perhaps the only free prebiotic we have available to us. Research has clearly shown that regular exercise done over a matter of weeks increases the diversity of our microbiome, increases keystone species, these bacteria that have particularly prominent roles to play within our gut and systemic health. But it also increases the function, the metabolic output of our gut microbiome. So short chain fatty acids like butyrate has a big role to play within maintaining a healthy gut barrier. The amount of butyrate bacteria produced increases when we're physically active. So we have to be prioritizing exercise and physical activity as a way to build a really resilient gut microbiome. The third thing is socializing. Research has also shown us that there is a relationship, a correlation between the size of our social network and the diversity of our gut microbiome. We are really kind of dispersing our microbiome amongst others when we interact with them. So we are exposing ourselves to a broader range of organisms when we are socializing. And that is a positive thing within this context. So when we're on a healing journey, I totally get it. And I've absolutely been there myself, where we actually sometimes unintentionally see our life shrink. We start to socialize less because our symptoms are bothering us and we feel really bloated or fatigued, or our cognition is so poor, we're struggling to be able to go out and have any fun. And our life just shrinks. And that is understandable and will feel like the right thing to do at that point in time, and it may well be. But again, one of the things that we need to try and do is maintain at least some of our core relationships during that healing process, because socializing not only supports a resilient microbiome, it has so many other health benefits, as we're starting to see. In fact, loneliness is a significant risk factor when it comes to dis-ease and mortality. So we need people, we need interaction if we're to really build a healthy gut again. The fourth one I want to touch on is getting into nature. And there's all sorts of different research that we could actually touch on here. I'm going to mention two studies that I read not that long ago. The first one looked at children in a nursery setting, and the takeaway really was that if the researchers of the study planted more plants around the nursery, the microbiome of the children diversified. We also see that in, households. If you diversify the plant matter in your garden and you spend a little time in your garden, you're going to see an improvement in gut microbiome diversity. In fact, one study showed that gardening families generally have a more resilient microbiome than non-gardening families. And the really interesting thing was that the whole family didn't have to garden. One person, one member of the family unit could be the gardener, but that had an impact on the entire household. So getting in contact with nature, going for walks in your local park, doing some gardening, bringing some nature into your home, have plants scattered around the place. These things are having a positive impact on our overall health and on the resiliency of our gut microbiome. The fifth thing I want to talk about, which I've forgotten, is motility. So transit time, the rate that food travels from mouth to anus. This is actually one of the most important components of a healthy microbiome. If you have too fast or too slow motility, that is impacting the quality of the stool, the formation of the stool, and that is impacting the rate at which bacteria can replicate within your large intestine. And that is going to be having a negative impact if it's too fast or too slow. A very simple test you can do at home to check your motility is the sweet corn test. Get a can of sweet corn and eat, individual parts of the sweet corn. Don't chew, swallow them, and keep an eye on your bowel movements. And, transit time should be in the region of something like 16 to 24 hours. So that sweet corn should be all out, really, around 24 hours later. If you're seeing sweet corn in your stool 2, 3, 4 days later, that is a sign that you obviously have compromised motility. That is going to be explaining the symptoms that you're experiencing to some degree. And it also means that to get a resilient microbiome is going to require figuring out what's causing that poor motility in the first place. And there are lots of different things that can contribute to that. From gut-brain axis issues to thyroid imbalances to chronic stress, amongst other things. But motility is kind of a prerequisite to a healthy gut and a healthy, diverse, resilient gut microbiome. Now, a really important thing to kind of acknowledge within this transit thing is if you're sitting there right now saying, Alex, I have a really easy to pass, well-formed stool, and I have 1 or 2 even bowel movements a day, there's definitely no issue with my transit time. You can't say that, actually. There are people who have a well-formed, easy to pass stool, they're going for a poo every day, they go and do some form of transit test like the sweet corn test or something even more sophisticated, and they realize that actually their transit time is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 days. So just because you're going every day doesn't mean that what's coming out is what you were eating yesterday or the day before. You could have a really slow transit ultimately. So a transit test is a really important test to do as part of understanding what is causing your gastrointestinal symptoms at that point in time. So those are 5 things to consider to build a resilient gut microbiome. Any questions, as always, leave a comment below. I hope this has been somewhat helpful and educational and informative, and we'll be releasing more consistently over the coming weeks, sharing different information with you from gut health to everything in between. Thanks, everyone.